back to Shattering Myths. It's a pleasure to leave the news of the day. I wish we were going, however, to something more pleasurable than the musings of Paul. But, Kirk, you know, I was watching a British Open. I just call it the Open these days on television last night. It's ongoing even now as we speak. Winded out on Saturday. And the channel that it was on had on Sunday a preacher and was talking about Paul's letter to the Romans, the 7th chapter, and providing a reference to spirit, not talking about the born-again spirit. No, this was the spirit of a man. Men don't have spirits, do they?
No.
And have souls. According to God.
You have to attach to a spirit to live.
Yeah, and doesn't the 7th chapter of Romans call the Torah, it directly equates the Torah to a dead husband? Now, would you, and if you're trying to make an example, would you equate the Torah to a dead husband if you, in fact, thought that the Torah was from God, that it's something that God inspired? You think that?
You cannot make that connection.
No.
That's just ridiculous.
Totally
ridiculous.
It was probably the worst attempt at rational thought I have ever read. You know, here's a guy who is proposing a comparison, the Torah to a dead husband, and the wife not being under the husband, therefore not being under the Torah. You know, and we've been over it on this program where they mean every aspect of it, you know, and according to the Torah, women aren't under their husbands, only in Pauline Christianity. So he's being a complete hypocrite, because in Pauline Christianity, women have to submit to their husbands. There is no such rhetoric in the Torah.
I think it's the only place where women are totally equal.
Yes. Yeah, women are
completely writing. Nothing allows women to be equal to a man, and there's nowhere in the Torah that they're not.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, divorce is easy in the Torah. All you have to do is write a note and say, I don't want to be married anymore for the following reason, and that's it. So it's an extremely accommodating situation where women are treated with the appropriate esteem. You know, in the covenant, it's you know, Sarah plays an extraordinarily important role.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, just listen. How could you take television time to associate the rhetoric of a man who has equated the Torah to a deceased husband in the same chapter that you're quoting and pretending that it's godly, or you're doing something godly?
Well, I mean, if you just took a second and looked at it, and so obviously people can't figure that out.
No, and one of the things that's just so troubling about this is that, you know, this preacher said, you know, this was Paul's letter to the Romans. And it's the 13th chapter of this letter. Tells us that Paul writes that God establishes all governments, and governments are there for the good of the people, and that you should submit to the government. This was the government that destroyed the temple and then later came back and destroyed what was left of Yahowah, Judah, and Israel, salting the land, crucifying hundreds of thousands of God's people. This is the most repulsive civilization to have ever existed on this planet. Don't take my word for it. Read Daniel. That's what God has to say about Rome. And he says you should submit to them. I mean, how could you have a religion that could be that disjointed from its foundation?
Well, nothing says freedom like, you know, nothing says freedom like bowing down to a government of Rome and being captured and taken off into slavery. Yeah, there's no wonder that Theodosius established the Roman Catholic Church as the Roman government. Paul gave them total autonomy. If you believe Paul was inspired, then governments are inspired. Well, there's a parallel in Islam when the Khans, the Kublai Khans and the so forth came and conquered. They were warriors. They didn't rule anything. They conquered. They took their stuff and wiped everybody out. And when they invaded Arabia, if my history is correct, eventually they decided to stay. But they didn't have any ruling thing, so they took the Sharia law. They must have looked at it and said, at least that's what the historians say, they looked at it and said, wow, this is terrific. I can do anything I want, and I can train all the, and pretty much control all these people. So that became ultimately the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, that was Tamerlane. It was the first. You can't accuse Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan of. Yeah, because Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan were just warrior they were robber barons. No, they were actually they were effective thieves. Killing everyone is not a good way to be a thief. They only killed those who wouldn't surrender a percentage of their money to them and paid the taxes. It was Tamerlane who later realized that Islam was the perfect religion to empower the thievery that he was perpetrating, and it was Tamerlane that made the mountains out of skulls, mountains of skulls, and that was so unbelievably vicious. And so it was the intersection of the Mongol fighter through Tamerlane's adoption of Islam to justify and empower the ruthlessness that became the Ottoman Empire. That part's true.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with Paul. If you want to be a ruler and you look at his stuff, boy, that's a good religion to have under you.
Oh, again, if you're one of the kings the kings of Europe, and you're imposing your will to be treated as if you were authorized by God to deprive people of their freedoms, of all freedom and liberty, then you can justify it by pointing to the 13th chapter of Romans.
Right.
Yeah. These conservative Christians that are in opposition to the government, that think their government's out of control, how do they take that stand since they've got Paul's testimony in their Bibles?
Mm-hmm. Well, they pray that their president will turn around. See the light at some point.
No, but if the government was appointed by God, how is it that the government needs to turn around? Then
that was King James's point. If I'm appointed, shut up and
this says that I'm appointed. Mm-hmm. So just shut up and stand in line and bow down and do whatever you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is just so incredibly hypocritical, but it boils down to so few people are properly educated and judgmental that most people, when told that God is more antagonistic towards Rome and what would grow out of Rome in the sense of the Holy Roman Empire than any other human institution throughout all of history. And yet Paul writes that the government of Rome was established and good by God and that you need to submit to it. And when you compare those two things, and then you realize that Paul claimed that that same God inspired him to contradict him, why don't you just throw it out?
Well, I don't understand why, to this day, I don't think I'll ever understand why that Marcion knew what he was doing, and he cut everybody out.
Yeah.
And then later the church took that stuff, and then they added back in all the canons of and then they called him a heretic.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
To their own advantage, they should have left it the way it was.
Yeah, it was really interesting that during the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, which began by Theodosius in about 400 CE, by that time, Paul would have been long forgotten had it not been for Marcion, because Paul, right around 90-ish CE, he was completely out of steam. He had, by his own admission, read his second letter to Timothy. Everyone had rejected him. If you read the beginning of his ministry, everyone rejected him. His first letters, the letters to the Galatians, begins calling them all morons for having rejected him. and having so quickly departed from his rhetoric. Yeah, and then the letters to the Corinthians, the letters to the Thessalonica were all the same, that everyone that had listened to Paul rejected him. So he starts off that way with his first 6 letters, total rejection by everybody. And by the end of his career of preaching and writing, he tells Timothy, I'm all alone, there's no one, everyone has turned against me, everyone has rejected me. So those who knew Paul actually listened to him and thought about what he had to say, universally rejected him. And the only reason that Paul got put into the canon is that Marcion, who was a wealthy shipbuilder, was a kind of a neo-Gnostic. He had a variation of Gnosticism that he realized could be advanced with Paul's letters, because Paul wrote in favor of Gnosticism, and almost everything that Paul has to say is Gnostic in its origins. His whole battle of the flesh and the spirit, that's a Gnostic consideration. So Marcion created what he considered to be a Bible that was comprised of Paul's letters and a heavily edited bit of Luke and Acts, and that was it. And because he had so much money, he started proliferating the number of manuscripts that he paid for that were circulated, and there were hundreds upon hundreds of them as he advanced. And this would be in the area where the Eastern Roman Empire with Theodosius was ruling, and we found thousands upon thousands of manuscripts as a result of what Marcion did. And they became the majority text, and because they were a majority text, they were, when the Textus Receptus, for example, was conceived, they carried more weight. Now, it's true that because Marcion wanted to create a center around himself and Paul with his Bible, the Roman Catholic Church didn't like his influence, even though they loved his spread of the manuscripts, but they didn't like his influence, and so
power grab.
Yeah, so it was a power grab, and they because he was not willing to submit to them, they labeled him a heretic, and yet they kept everything that Marcion had advanced. Let me read something to you again, Kirk, because I think this is more than just the disciples. But from those currently to be considered and reputed to be someone important based upon some sort of past, they were actually nothing to me. In Israel, circa 50 CE, would Moshe be considered important because of his past?
Moshe never was not considered important.
Always, Moshe's always important because of the history that is embodied in what he and Yahowah did together.
Absolutely.
All right. So
he's a big deal.
So somebody that would be reputed to be someone important because of their past, that would include Moshe, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
In fact, Moshe would be top among them. And then next would be the guy that actually, since they were in Jerusalem, the founder of Jerusalem, the guy that wrote most of the Psalms, the guy that taught us how to study the Torah, David.
Right.
It's his city, after all.
Oh, yeah. He moved the capital.
Yeah, he had an interesting history, and it was considered to be important, wasn't he?
Big deal.
Yeah, big deal.
God after God's own heart.
Yeah, big deal. The guy that wrote the longest, actually was the scribe for the longest of Yahowah's prophetic revelations, Isaiah. That was a pretty interesting history. He was writing at the time of the Babylonian conquest. That was an interesting time of history. I view Yahowah as somewhat important based upon that past. How about you?
Well, they must have too, because only when they uncovered the stones of Solomon, got down to Solomon's layer of the temple that he built, Isaiah is written all over the stones. him in high esteem.
Yeah, it's interesting too that during the time of Dode and Solomon, which was 900 or 1000 BCE, Yahowah was 750 BCE. So his name was scribed on those foundation stones after they were laid. But Yahowah, he is the when it comes to prophets, if you were going to rank prophets, it'd be pretty hard to have Yahowah your top 5 based upon his past.
Well, yeah, and in the context of what he was mostly prophesying about the Messiah or Yahowah, that's pretty important stuff there.
When Yahowah was quoting prophets, did he think that Yahowah was somebody important because of his past?
He started his mission with Yahowah. No.
Yeah, that was the first prophet he quoted, wasn't it? He actually quoted a prophecy regarding the Yobel and his role in the year of the Lamb's redemption. I would say that he viewed him as important. And then those that were currently there in Jerusalem, that were currently held in the highest esteem by this group, which were the followers of Yahowah, who would be the most important, those reputed to be the most important because of their past? Who would that be?
Well, I would go with Shimon Kefish, although Yahuwah is pretty close second. But
yeah.
he really called Shimon like a friend. He treated him like his friend, like his bud.
Yeah, I think whether or not Shimon Kefish or Yahuwah were the closest to Yahowah would be a good debate, and I'm not really sure which one of the two. But my thinking is that it's I would arm wrestle you on behalf of Yahuwah, but the one that Yahowah, the reason that you would end up winning, even though I would arm wrestle in favor of Yahuwah, is because who is Yahowah seeing in his last discussion with the disciples? He has a very long discourse, and all the disciples are there. He's met them for breakfast in the Sea of Galilee. None of them recognized him. Even that was the second time they'd seen him. None of them recognized him. And he introduces himself again, and they're having this long discussion during breakfast on the Sea of Galilee. And the whole discussion is pointed to a single individual, and it tells him to watch over his sheep.
Right.
And who is that individual?
That's Shimon Kefish, known as Peter.
Yeah, Shimon Kefish is the one that Yahowah said, "You, Shimon Kefish, you watch over my sheep." And so I think you'd probably win that argument that based upon Yahowah's own declaration, that he was the one with the past history that was important. Paul's pal, Luke, chronicles, not based on a first-person experience, but on hearsay. What was said in this meeting that Paul is saying, I went up there based on a revelation, but the people that were supposedly important because of their past, their testimony meant nothing to me. Who does... in the book of Acts, who is it that rises up after Paul gives his diatribe and says, this is, I, Paul? Who rises up and says, no, that's just not true? Because Paul claimed that all of the Gentiles belonged to him and that God had given him the entire Gentile world, and that all Shimon Kefish, Peter, and the disciples had were the Jews. And after hearing that, who was it that stood up and said, no, that's just not true?
I'm assuming it was Shimon Kefish. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it was Shimon Kefish. And he's quoted in Acts by Luke standing up and saying, no, that's not true. He says, look what happened here on Shavuot, on the day of 50. And all of the Gentiles that we witnessed to. But the whole purpose of the one thing we're told on Shavuot that occurred is that those who were the beneficiaries of, Pesach Matzah Bakurim, and who knew and understood the role that Yosha had played fulfilling the Torah. They were given what ability? There's one specific ability that they were granted according to the Book of Acts. What was that?
To speak and be understood.
And what?
And I'm not sure what you mean.
They could speak and be understood in Hebrew, right? They were speaking Hebrew.
But they were already Hebrew, but they were understood in every language of the.
So it's their ability to speak languages other than Hebrew. Oh, okay. So the thing that happened on Shavuot, according to the Book of Acts, is that these all 12 of them now, 11 surviving, the 11 Hebrew Jewish disciples, all of whom spoke Hebrew as their native language. The one thing that changed that we know of on Shavuot, on the day of 50, was they were given the ability to speak foreign languages. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that would imply what?
They were able to speak the languages not spoken by the Jews.
I thought it would imply that Yahowah was reaching out to everybody.
In fact, did Yahowah actually, in the Book of Acts, I know you haven't read it recently, didn't he actually specify the languages and the nationalities that...
I know he named quite a few. So.
Yes, like 20 of them that are named, 15 to 20 on the list. Were all of them Gentile?
Yes.
Okay. So here's Paul claiming that God appointed him exclusive rights over the Gentiles, and yet just a matter of 5 or 6 chapters earlier in the Book of Acts, you've got Yahowah directly intervening through the day of 50, Shavuot, empowering Shimon Kephesh and the other disciples to be able to speak the languages of the Gentiles to share Yahowah's teaching with the Gentiles. And now Paul waltzes into town and says, no, they're my exclusive domain. You only have the Jews.
Yeah, you're circumcised.
Yeah, so Paul stands up, or Peter stands up, Shimon Kephesh stands up and says, are you crazy? Are you completely unaware of what's happened here? But what does Paul say about that? When Shimon Kephesh stands up to him and said, man, you're wrong. Right. That we were told to share Yosha's message with the entire world, and that we were empowered to do it with the ability to speak every language of the world. And you're now claiming that that's all wrong, that God lied to us, and that we're to only share Yosha's message in this little strip of a province named Yahowah, and just to Jews?
So,
wow.
When confronted with such an argument, the only thing you can do is attack the messenger or the argument.
Yeah. At this point, if you're a Christian, you've got to say, wait a minute. That what Paul is saying is an absolute impossibility. It's a direct contradiction of what Yosha, which you have misnamed Jesus, said. It's a direct contradiction of what Acts says occurred on the day of 50, which you would call Pentecost, which is Shavuot. And so you've got Paul directly contradicting both the Book of Acts and also the disciples and also Yosha. And he's also contradicting Yahowah, who said there's one Torah and one Passover for all, Jew and Gentile.
Right. I mean, did Yahowah say or not say that his 5 requirements for joining the family is covenant relationship, or these are them and they are there forever? Everywhere you read is forever.
Did Yahowah ever speak of a new covenant?
Never.
Never. I mean, one time in a letter written to Gentiles, Yirmiyah, he speaks of the reaffirmation of his covenant.
Yeah,
not a new one.
With Israel.
With Yisrael and Yahowah, not with Gentiles.
Yeah. So that's not an argument.
So Paul can't claim it. The Gentile church can't claim it. It was written to as a restoration of the covenant with Yahowah and with Yisrael. Oops. And, of course, what is the basis? There's one thing that's different in the reaffirmation of the covenant upon Yahweh's return that is different than the covenant as it exists today. One thing that's different.
It's a very big difference because
it is
not only is it the Torah, the thing that supposedly says a dead husband.
Yes.
It is the Torah placed in your heart, so you know it's with you, it's in your mind, it's in your thoughts constantly. So it's not a question of, gosh, I've got to study this so hard to figure out whatever.
Literally,
it's part of your being.
Right. The entire Torah is incorporated into the fabric of your being by the author of the Torah. I guess it must be that reincarnation or resurrection must be possible, because God must be resurrecting a dead husband.
Mm-hmm.
Either that or you're going to have a dead husband put inside of your heart.
Is that the... Well, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, you can't.
No, of course. If you're Christian, it's the end. You can't process that information that is presented in Jeremiah 31 and remain a Christian, and be honest with yourself or express any logic or any degree of discernment. At that point, you have to simply let go of all evidence and believe. And in that point, you know you're believing a lie. Why would you do that?
You just have to be totally brain dead, or you have an agenda.
Yes. So Paul has declared here, and we've spent now a number of shows on this same passage, but it's essential for people to understand what's going on here. Paul has announced that as he approached, he was in the midst of the Jerusalem summit, where he was called here because his teaching was in conflict with Yahusha, the Christian Jesus, and in conflict with Yahowah, Torah and prophet's declaration, his witness, that Paul was called to Jerusalem because he claimed to be speaking for God when in fact he was contradicting God. And so there, the disciples spoke out against him. We have Shimon Kefish particularly saying, you're wrong about your claim that God appointed you to the Gentiles and us to the Jews.
So why don't they say that in St. Peter's?
Yeah, you're wrong when you say that the covenant is, the Torah is now dead. You're wrong when you say there's a new covenant. You're wrong on all of these things. And so Paul, the weasel that he is, didn't debate them. He didn't say, I'm right because of these statements from Yahowah. These statements from Yahusha affirm that I'm right. No, he made no attempt to validate his call or claim based upon the testimony of Yahweh, which is the only way we would ever attempt to validate whether or not something is true. Never did.
How could he?
No. All he does is he deploys the ad hominem fallacy.
Well, what your audience doesn't know, today's audience, a lot of them may not know, because I know some of them listen to the other program. Let me just interject that you read a verse on the Friday program that is true, and of course it is. The Yahweh is stating what is required to become part of his family. Obviously, you have to respond to it and then become and agree to the terms and conditions of the mitzvah, the covenant family, to become a member of the covenant family. But he said the most profound thing that hit me like a ton of bricks, even though I knew it. It just really was a big deal Friday. And it was that God asked you to do one thing, and that is to hear and observe his writings, his Torah, the thing that Paul is assailing.
Yeah, actually, even more specific. The one thing that he wants us to listen to, he wants us to listen to his voice and to observe his testimony regarding the single most important thing in the universe.
His covenant, his
covenant, which is only presented in one place. As a matter of fact, the statement is in the Torah. The statement that is being made is a Torah statement directing us to the covenant. And he says over and over again in this that if you will closely examine and carefully consider the covenant, if you will listen to my testimony regarding the covenant and act upon it, that if you do those things, then you are going to be a people set apart. You're going to be the most valuable possession, commodity in the world to me. And the most valuable thing to me are my sons.
Okay.
Yeah, the most valuable thing to me are my sons. God is saying that if you observe this Torah, you're going to be as valuable to me as my own children. Now, all you got to do is pay attention to the covenant.
Now, how does that become law, obey,
right,
of the Torah, and how does the Torah become dead based on that? There is no argument.
Can you tell me how Yahowah enslaved Abraham? I thought he enriched him.
He was a lot better off after he met Yahowah.
Yeah, how did he rob him? I thought he gave him an enormous inheritance.
I think he knelt down and baraked him, didn't he? And lifted him up.
Didn't he give him the greatest joy in life, the son?
Yeah.
They were actually nothing to me. Speaking of the disciples, speaking of the prophets, speaking of the author of the Torah, they were nothing to me, of no account, completely meaningless and worthless. Wow. Odious is the Greek word. It's we've transliterated the Greek word odious into the English word odious. They were odious to me. It carries through the face of the God of man not take hold of. I'm sure as a grammarian that you can decipher that for me. It carries through the face of the God of man not take hold of. Okay. And this guy's speaking for God? Because to me, why do we care to him? I guess because he's writing this letter. The ones currently presuming and supposing, of no account was their advice and counsel. Was their one-time cause, were their comments, were their limited contribution. Wow. I mean, he is completely undermining the disciples, the prophets who've come before them, Moshe, even Yosha. They're all nothing to him. So, if you look at the rest of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, it's all built off the same foundation. It begins with the Torah, and then you have the writings, and then you have the Psalms, and then you have the prophets, and it's all one story, all consistent, all builds from that foundation.
And nothing is contradicted by Yahusha.
Right. Yahusha builds on it.
Yeah.
And yet here you have this guy sweep it all away. Meant nothing to me. So if that's the case, if you're a Christian, all you have is Paul. You've got to do just like him. If you're going to embrace him, the rest of it has to be nothing to you. I mean, so why did Yosha bother with the disciples?
Why did he bother?
Why did he bother? Why did he bother to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim?
For what purpose if you're going to wash it all away?
Right. Why did Yahowah bother with all of the prophecies regarding Yosha?
Not necessary.
What was the purpose?
Right.
What was the purpose of the Torah?
There is no reason for the Torah if Paul's right.
What's the purpose for all of the Psalms that David wrote? David.
Again, no, same thing. It becomes perfect. It has no meaning if the Torah is swept away.
And without the Torah and the prophets, Yosha is a complete liar and meaningless. His whole life, nothing he says or does has any validity, any meaning, any purpose. It's just a ghoulish scene and a spectacle. Wow. So according to this, you can discount everything. God himself. All you got is Paul. It was all meaningless to me. Boy, would you trade Paul and his letters for the Torah?
I can't even
for
read
the prophets? Yeah, I can't even read it.
Read his letters.
I mean, I can analyze them and I can look up the Greek words, but I can't. They are so disjointed, they don't even make sense. I mean, Shimon Kevish could go out and speak to all these different people, and they understood in their own language every word, clear as a bell. And this guy can't even speak in the language that's supposed to be his language.
Wow. This, of course, the King James to this passage wrote, "But of those who seem to be somewhat, whatever they were, or whosoever they were, it maketh no matter to me. God accepteth no man's person, for they who seemed to be somewhat in confidence added nothing to me."
Well, that sounds almost as bad as the guy standing in front of the Marines.
Utter gibberish. But what's this idea that God accepteth no man's person?
Yeah, well, he just told you you'd be the most favorite person in his family, you know, or one of his most favorite people.
If
he cares a lot about persons.
Yeah, he said, you're going to be the most valuable commodity in the universe to me.
The covenant is about persons.
Right, it's about persons. Do you think that Yahowah was just kidding around with the person that was Abraham?
I don't think so.
What about the person that was Yishak and Jacob?
No, he was totally involved in their life.
And what did Yahowah have to say about the person known as David?
Oh, it's his favorite of all.
And what about this person that is the diminished manifestation of Yahowah, Yahusha?
That's his representative.
So God hath accepted no man's person, didn't Yahowah tell us he was going to accept the sacrifice of Pesach and Matzah of Yahusha on our behalf?
To seal the deal.
Wow, I think Paul was wrong.